Welcome to a short introduction to our book on the topic of high fructose corn syrup and its link to obesity, metabolic syndrome, and type 2 diabetes. Now, these are serious topics and of concern, I'm sure, to all of you. Now, we've all heard about the trend for overweight, increase in overweight, even in our children. And we wrote this book, myself and my sister, to help you to understand why this is the trend currently. I am a professor of biochemistry where I taught for 32 years, even to a football team, to help all of my students to be healthier. And Joanne McIntyre is an echocardiographer who's worked many years directly with children in a pediatric cardiology private practice. Her interest in this topic came from her desire to help the young and increasingly obese patients, very young ones, to be healthier and to lose weight. The question is, are we getting fatter? You've heard this in so many reports, and you've seen trends, I'm sure, even in your friends and your children and everyone else. But unfortunately, we don't know why. And that's what this book is about. Now, if you look at this chart, and I must add that all of these charts come directly from the book, you'll notice that on the one side it says percentage of the population, and on the bottom it has years. And you can see that there is an increase in obesity from 1975 to the year 2000, and there is also a parallel increase in the consumption of high fructose corn syrup. And high fructose corn syrup, by the way, was introduced in the 1970s during a sugar embargo. It wasn't put out by the corn industry to hurt you. It was just produced as a substitute for the cane sugar, because we didn't have very much cane in our country, and they went to beets, and finally they introduced high fructose corn syrup in the 70s. And during the period of time then, up till 2010 when this chart ends, the consumption of sugar actually dropped by about 40 pounds, but the consumption of high fructose corn syrup went up by 70 pounds per year. And you can now find this in everything if you were to look carefully, and it comes under many names. You find it in sodas, breakfast cereals, and even in infant formula. In this picture, we have spelled out for you by age the increase in obesity by age group. And you can see in particular there is a very large increase in obesity even in the very young children, and especially in teenagers. And this is really very disturbing, because the body mass index of 30 is considered obese, and there are more and more people who are reaching this category. And you can see, for example, that there's the greatest increase is the 12 to 19-year-olds, and there's an increase from 4.6 to 18%. The sad part about it, though, is the 2 to 5-year-olds. Their obesity prevalence increased from 5 to 10% from 1971 to 2008. Now, this group can't go walk down to the corner and buy junk food. So they're getting their increase from their parents. And it's not their parents are doing anything wrong, it's that their parents are unaware that high fructose corn syrup is in so many different things. Now, when I lecture, I always give the bottom line first, then I explain it, then I give it again. So let me tell you that high fructose corn syrup does, and then I'm going to tell you again, and then I'll explain it. First, high fructose corn syrup is made of free fructose and free glucose. Those are two different carbohydrates. That extra fructose does not get metabolized the same as glucose, so it is not the same. It gets taken up into the liver and is changed to something called glycerol. Glycerol is the backbone of something very important in your yearly blood test, which are the triglycerides. So in other words, you are donating to the backbone to make more fat. And obese people often will get, first, before they get fat, they'll get a fatty liver. And we have done many studies, and numerous scientists have done studies showing increase in fatty livers in animal models of animals that are fed high fructose corn syrup. Unfortunately, once the liver undergoes that change, and because it is one of the major organs in your body involved in the control of metabolism, you then sabotage your normal metabolic setup, and you're on your way to type 2 diabetes. The second organ involved in the control of metabolism is the brain. And the brain has receptors for hunger and for being full. And fructose does not bind to these receptors. Only glucose does. The brain is really interesting, as in parts of our organs can use a lot of different sources of energy, but the brain can only use glucose. And when you say blood sugar, you're meaning glucose. The structure glucose makes up 99.9% of the carbohydrate and 100% of the energy source of the brain, unless you're under a starvation system. So the net bottom line on this is your kids are hungry all the time. They'll eat that breakfast cereal with the high fructose corn syrup in it, and an hour later they're hungry because the fructose has not signaled full to the brain, and you're needing some energy, and the fructose will not supply that energy to the brain. Now, this is just a slide to show you how other countries, like Canada in this case, versus the U.S., deals with their food. I know there's a lot in the news right now about GMO and a lot of anti-GMO and pro-GMO and so forth, but there are other problems with foods from our country versus other countries. And if you look here at the Canadian cheese spread, that's that liquidy orangish spread that you spray or you use on or you melt to put over your corn chips and so forth. And this, you can see that it has modified milk ingredients, so on and so forth, And here you see down as you're reading along that high fructose corn syrup is found in the U.S. cheese spread, and not up here in the Canadian spread. Now there's a lot of other things here to notice too, that there's a lot more what we call artificial ingredients down here, like the natural and artificial coloring, for example, and so forth, found in the cheese spread in the U.S. versus the Canadian cheese spread. And you can find these in the book, a lot of examples to show you the difference in the two different countries. When you go to look for high fructose corn syrup in a food and a label when you're in the supermarket, you're going to see it called a number of names, and this is the explanation. Now, high fructose corn syrup can come under several categories. It can come under something called, and it may be abbreviated as HFCS, 55 or 45. That's the percent of the fructose, and you can even have high fructose corn syrup 90, in other words, a lot of fructose in it, but that's usually only used as a blender. So you can find these two types. Table sugar is 50-50 fructose to glucose. And we say 55, we mean it's now 5% more fructose that's found in that particular compound versus glucose. But what does this mean? Only 5% more fructose. Does this mean that that's important? It means it's 0.5 pounds per year, and we now have 60 pounds per year in 2011 of consumption. Whereas sucrose, table sugar, that's the white table sugar that you're eating, putting in your coffee, unless you're using artificial. And that went down 70 to 40 pounds. You can see that the structures are very different. And you've probably seen people say, oh, well, you know, your body doesn't know the difference. They're probably no difference, and we're just fine because this can be turned into this and so forth. Well, you can see, in fact, that this is very different. This is a bigger ring. Let's not get confused and look at this. Look at this as if you have not had any chemistry, just look. Stand back and look overall at what the pictures look like. Glucose, that is blood sugar right there. fructose, that's what we find free in high fructose corn syrup. Very different structures here. This one will go directly into cells, can be cut and turned into the source of sugar, and the others the fructose cannot. In this study, which is also in the book, we look at what I call a classic study of what happens in an animal system, and they've now repeated some of this in humans, or looked back at humans studies with the tendency to increase weight, and we find the difference in they've looked here on this obviously with gonads are males, and this is a female study, and they looked at several different feeding regimes. This is ad libitum, means as much as you want, of high fructose corn syrup. That's the dark one. The daily just regular chow without high fructose corn syrup would be the white. The gray here is 12 hours of table sugar, and then they take it away from them, and that's this one. And then 12 hours of high fructose corn syrup would be this one. And you can see from this that there is a great increase in abdominal, that would be stomach fat, in these animals that were eating as much as they wanted of high fructose corn syrup. This is probably the closest to humans. We don't regulate ourselves on a 12-12 cycle like we can do with an animal in a cage. So you can see that these animals greatly increase their we now know, of course, that stomach fat is linked to lots of different diseases. You've heard this probably too. But does your body know the difference? Yes, high fructose corn syrup causes fat. So calorie counting is not enough. You have to change what you eat. You have to drop high fructose corn syrup from your diet. It is found tremendously in sodas. It is found in almost anything you can eat. Unfortunately, many restaurants have now changed those little packets of maple syrup and jellies and so forth. They still have high fructose corn syrup in them. And you just have to watch and find a substitute for that. It takes time initially, but you'll find a list in the back of the book that describes the brands that have gone to regular sucrose instead of high fructose corn syrup. What does high fructose corn syrup do exactly? How does it work differently than table sugar? Well, when you eat table sugar, as I showed you before, you eat and you digest, and the table sugar that you put in your coffee, or that you have put into your food, or that it's normally in your food, goes to 1 fructose and 1 glucose. And as I said before, this 1 glucose can go directly into the blood to alter your blood glucose level and make it normal. And you have receptors on all of your cells for glucose, and it differs the number of receptors that you have. And we already know that this is controlled by the pancreas, right? That's insulin. You know that diabetics have to take insulin, and that controls the uptake of glucose into cells so that you don't get high or low blood sugar levels. Fructose, on the other hand, some can be changed to glucose, but not very easily. First, it goes to the liver, and then you have the problem with changing it to a glycerol and increasing triglycerides. So that then is the problem with having too much fructose around. And we're not talking about a short term. We're talking about as your child grows up and continuously has extra 5% fructose throughout their life, and slowly clicks into what I call the obesity metabolic system. This is the structure of the glycerol right here, and these are fats. You've heard of the in your blood you're measuring your triglycerides and you're measuring your fatty acids, and you've also heard about what is called saturated and unsaturated fats. And by way of explanation, that means that if it's saturated, it has something called a single bond, and if it's unsaturated, it has a double bond. And the unsaturated, or in things we call it polyhydrogenated and so forth, would indicate the number of single or double bonds you have here. And when you have more double bonds here, these fats are metabolized better. The ones with, like this one over here, that has all single bonds, would not be metabolized very well, and it would tend to accumulate in arteries and so on and so forth and contribute to. As I said before, the brain only recognizes glucose. And with high fructose corn syrup, because it is not bound to the brain, you're going to have a feeling of not being full, and you'll increase your consumption of calories as a result of that. If you are, in fact, I give people this test in my class. I say, take a Coke, one of the old glass-bottled Cokes, and you look on the label and make sure it says cane sugar in it, versus one of the ones that has high fructose corn syrup in it. I have them drink the one that has the high fructose corn syrup in it, and make sure it's the same volume, and they can drink the whole thing just fine. Then, at the end of class, I have them take an equal volume of the one with glucose in it, or cane sugar, and many people can't finish it because it will make them feel full. You can try this over and over again, and the brain is now signaling full, and so you will not eat as much or drink as much in that case of something that has cane sugar in it versus something that has high fructose corn syrup in it. What about the artificial sweeteners? First of all, aspartame is toxic. That's one of the bad ones, and you don't want that one. It has been linked to many, many different problems. It is one of the ones that goes across the blood-brain barrier and accumulates in the brain, so don't take that. But there are many that are all right. You may want to, if you're having a problem on, say, with type 2 diabetes and you need to limit your sugar, they're very useful for that. Now let's take a look here at these 3 recipes. The first recipe is a recipe for, well, first of all, they're all brownies. They're all brownie recipes. And the first recipe is taken from, and I can't advertise, so this is taken from a label on a organic food type of brownie. And you can see that it does have high fructose corn syrup in it. So you will find some like that. I'm sorry, I said this back. This one is the normal and this one is from a organic recipe. So this one has high fructose corn syrup in it, and this one does not have high fructose corn syrup in it. It has cane sugar instead, and there's also some natural flavors. By the way, xanthine gum is something that gives something more solidity. But you will notice this also has artificial flavors. You want to watch that because some of these artificial flavors can be toxic also. This one also has the solidifying agent in it, but it doesn't have in it. It also has artificial flavors though, so this isn't completely safe for you to eat. This is a recipe for brownies in a cookbook, a very old cookbook. And you see it just has sugar, butter, and it doesn't have artificial flavors or anything like that. It doesn't have artificial coloring, gargum, or any kind of things. And you can find these kind of brownies sometimes, but you really have to look for them in the organic store. Here's another example. This is peanut butter. The peanut butter on the top is just a commercial brand found in a grocery store. And you can see all the different oddball things it has in it, and you wonder why they're there. It has corn syrup solids. That's just another name for high fructose corn syrup. And it has a lot of other things that you may wonder about. Diglycerides give it a nice unctuous fatty flavor. It has this is a vitamin B. It has zinc oxide and magnesium oxide, which are things that make it more stable on the shelf. Zinc oxide, as you'll know, is also in sunblocks, so that's a little strange that you're eating that. But if you look down here at the organic version of peanut butter, it's much simpler, no preservatives, just nuts, some oil, eggs, milk, and so forth. So what have we learned so far? Well, we learned that high fructose corn syrup is not the same as sugar. Sugar meaning sucrose. meaning one molecule of fructose and one molecule of glucose linked together. High fructose corn syrup, as I said before, has a higher percent of fructose. And we know that fructose does not signal the brain to make you feel full, so you tend to eat more, consume more calories. It's metabolized differently. It'll make you get a fatty liver. It'll lead to something called metabolic syndrome, which then leads to type 2 diabetes, something which is increasing hugely now in our society. So your body does know the difference. It isn't using them the same, and there's nothing natural about it. I want to add the latest update actually it's from 2012 when the book just came out. Identification of 6 major, what we call alpha dicarbonyl process contaminants in the production of high fructose corn syrup. Now, high fructose corn syrup is from corn, obviously, and they take corn starch. Now let me first say there's nothing wrong with corn starch because it hasn't been made into high fructose corn syrup, and your body won't make that into high fructose corn syrup. But they do that synthetically. They add some chemicals and some enzymes to it, and then they have to put everything through a purification system, and they use chemicals to purify that high fructose corn syrup. And they found that one of those contaminants is something called 3-deoxyglucosone, which causes diabetes. So that's another link to the consumption of high fructose corn syrup and diabetes in society. Now let me say then that you can do this. You can change what you eat. It will take a long period of time, and you should never attempt to do this quickly. If you've ever had to go on a low-salt diet, you'll know that that's no fun, and it takes a long time to get used to that. It's the same way here. You really have a tendency to love sweet things, and so when you change it, only change one small thing at a time in your diet as you eliminate the consumption of high fructose corn syrup.